Hey everybody, I wanted to continue with this idea of how to look at a psalm, not just how to read it, but how to look at it. And I didn't mean to overplay the idea that, you shouldn't start with reading it. Certainly you should read it. But I'm real interested in doing a flyover. And I always try to do that before I get into a psalm and really start studying the depth of it. I may read it several times, but it's important to kind of do a flyover and see how it's put together. Now, we're going to talk about something called parallelism, and parallelism is a it's just very common in Hebrew poetry. When we think about traditional Western poetry, we think about certain kinds of rhythm and we think about rhyme. Now, that's not necessarily true in the 20th century or even before the 20th century, but average person thinks that a poem should rhyme. And so anyway, that's a very common idea. Well, in Hebrew poetry, their poetry, which is what the Psalms are, their poetry had rhythm, but the rhythm's more easily detected in Hebrew, as I understand it. I don't read Hebrew, but that's what I learned. But then also parallelism does come through in the translation in English. And so I want to show you what parallelism is. Parallelism, the study of parallelism can get very complex, okay? And so I'm not going to go there, but I just want to show you kind of two of the basic building blocks of parallelism. One in particular shows up in Psalm 13, and so that's why I'm showing it to you. And some of the others we'll explore as we go along when we get into other Psalms. So I need to do this kind of quickly. So, okay, here we go. So parallelism is a feature of Hebrew poetry that states an idea in one line and then enlarges it or comments on it or even counters it in the next line. And I'll show you some examples of that. But you might think of parallelism as kind of an inbuilt commentary. It very often it strikes me that there'll be this one line and then the next line will comment on that first line or expand it a little bit or give you a different angle on it. And it's important to pay attention to that because it's intentional. And so I'll show you. So there are two types of parallelism. There's synonymous parallelism. And Psalm 27:1 is a perfect example. And I use color to distinguish these lines. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Well, those lines in blue are almost completely synonymous. But the lines in brown, yellow, whatever that is, the Lord is my light and my salvation. The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Are parallel to each other. And in one hand, it's kind of a mixed metaphor for sure. But in the first line, the Lord is a light, and that light is essential to my salvation. And that light is my salvation. And then the Lord is the stronghold of my life. See, the Lord is repeated there. The stronghold is the parallel of light, and life is the parallel of salvation. And so you have the metaphor of life here, and you also have the metaphor of a protected fortress. And so see how the second line enlarges on the first line, even though it's kind of a mixed metaphor. Then antithetical parallelism is very common in wisdom literature, and you see this a lot in the Psalms. It's usually like this: the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked shall perish. In Psalm 1:6. And so it's this idea that these kinds of people are on the right path, but these kind of people are not on the right path, and there's no in between there. And that's typical of antithetical parallelism. So in Psalm 13, I'll just point out some things to you. The most obvious thing in the first stanza of Psalm 13 is the repetition of the phrase, how long, how long, how long, how long, how long. And that's to give this, that works to give this psalm rhetorical force. In other words, a psalm just doesn't give you content. A psalm is designed to also arouse emotion. And if you have ever been in a circumstance where you were in anguish and it didn't seem like that anguish was ever going to end, you may have found yourself asking, how long is this going to go on? And even if you didn't direct it directly to the Lord, it's a kind of prayer. How long is this going to go on? I remember as a child, we'd drive 50 miles to visit my aunt, and all the way down there, I'd be going, how much longer, how much longer, right? And so that's kind of what the psalmist is doing here. What's much more important, what he's struggling with is much more important than that. But that repetition, see, is a really kind of a form of eloquence. If you could imagine Martin Luther King in his very dramatic way of preaching, he was a great orator. What he would make of this. And I do believe, I recall a sermon by Martin Luther King where he keeps asking, how long? And he'd answer, not long, and then say why, and then how long, and not long. So I'll try to find that if I can. Okay, so that's just sheer repetition. But then you have this synonymous line here, and all of these are in purple. And this is in second person. I always like to note person and tense. And I didn't note tense in this, but that's two of the things I try to pay attention with too. Will you forget me forever? That's, how long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? And so see the second line there, will you hide your face from me, comments on will you forget me forever? And we'll talk about that when we come around to discussing this psalm. But see, those two lines are synonymous, and they're in the second person. See, he's speaking directly to God here. And then the next one is synonymous, but it's first person. How long will I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart? And that's also called synthetic parallelism. And but here's the point of it. In the first line there, how long will I wrestle with my thoughts? He is talking about the thoughts, of course, in his own mind, but then every day have sorrows in my heart. He's speaking about emotion. And so this is thought and emotion. And we can all relate to that. We've all had experience where our thoughts would not settle down because of how they were just going in circles in our minds, and we couldn't stop that. And so this is synonymous first person. He's talking about himself. And then I call this synonymous first and third person because he's still talking about himself, but he's talking about himself in reference to his enemies triumphing over him. So it's third person in terms of the enemies and first person over their effect. And also see, if you look at all those purple lines, will you forget me forever? Will you hide your face from me? Will I wrestle with my thoughts every day? Have sorrow in my heart? Will my enemy triumph over me? You're looking at the sources of his anguish, and I'll tell you right now, if it didn't jump out to you, there's a theological source, there is a personal source, and there is a relational or a social source. There's God, there's the person, there's David himself, and then there's the fact of David's enemies. So we'll come back to that. And then in the second stanza, look on me and answer, O Lord, my God, give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. My enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. And so look on me and answer, give light to my eyes are parallel to each other. And of course, O Lord, my God, is part of the address. So the second line comments on what will happen if God looks on me and answers, that I believe he will give light to my eyes. And I think those are imperatives. I have to double check that. So he's speaking very directly to God here. And so those lines are a parallel second person. Look on me, God. He's talking to God. Give light to my eyes, God. He's talking to God. Or, and then lines in purple are the consequences. If something doesn't happen, I will sleep in death. I have overcome him when I fall. The blue there, of course, is synonymous third person. My enemy, they will say, and my foes will rejoice. But see, my enemy will say, and my foes will rejoice, are parallel synonymously with each other. And then I have overcome him when I fall, is what they'll say. Those lines are parallel. Something interesting here, the outcome is parallel. Well, I'll just show you. If you read this from the bottom up to the second line, second from the top line, when I fall, my enemies will say, I have overcome him and I will sleep in death. So there's kind of a progression there, it seems like, from the bottom up. Now, I'm not going to swear to that in a court of law, but it struck me as I was thinking about and studying this psalm myself. When I fall, I will be overcome and I will sleep in death. So there's that. And then the final stanza is synonymous first person. I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord. So all that's in green there is parallel to each other. And then all that's in white is parallel to each other. Unfailing love and salvation. And for he has been good to me. Now, I jumped the gun there. It's just a second, but I want you to pay attention to tenses as well. I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices. Those are both in present tense. And then this I will sing, I said in the last video, sounds a little like a vow that he promises to do this in the future. But notice this, he will sing to the Lord, for he has been good to me. Now that may mean he has been good to me in the past, and here I am in this struggle, or it could be taken to mean that God has answered this lament, and so it's in the recent past, that this has been answered. So, so I encourage you to pay attention to these lines of parallelism. I encourage you to pay attention to the person. Is it first person, second person, third person? And I encourage you to pay attention to the tenses as well. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm stumbling over my words, but I'm trying to go as fast as I can. And there's Psalm 13, and we will come around to it next time. Thanks. Bye.